Okay. Well, hello and welcome everyone. It's so nice to have you here today. My name is Bo Vass. I'm the lead auditing and testing consultant from the digital access team at Vision Australia. So thank you all for being here and taking the time out of your day or night to be here from wherever you're watching in Australia or around the world. In the spirit of reconciliation, Vision Australia acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Today, we are joined by my colleague from Digital Access, as you can see here, Matt Putland, who will be taking us through the details of the upcoming Wikag 2.2 update. Just before we get started, just some of the housekeeping to get through. Matt's presentation will run for about 45 minutes and then we'll have time for questions after. There's been some questions submitted in advance with your registration, so thank you for those. We'll get to those questions, but you also have the opportunity to post questions during the presentation. If you have any for Matt, you can post them using the Q&A button. So please post them there. We have live transcripts running. So has the button moved for the live transcripts? I don't see the button. I'll get back to you on transcripts in the chat. Normally we'll have the live transcript running. You can open that in a separate browser to follow along. A recording of the webinar with captions will be provided on the Digital Access YouTube channel. So we'll send out a link for that when it's available. You can share that with people and catch up on some of our past webinars as well. And also please use the chat feature if you have any comments, questions, or you need any help, assistance with anything with the presentation, and we'll be able to help you there. And participate in the discussion as well. And with that, we're ready to get started. So Matt is a senior digital accessibility consultant on the digital access team at Vision Australia. And he runs our very popular web accessibility techniques and testing training course. And he's here to talk to us about what's in Wikag 2.2. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Matt, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bo. So yes, we are talking about what's coming in Wikag 2.2. If you don't know what Wikag is, we will dive into it before actually getting into what's new. So we've got a lot to get through, so I'm just going to dive right into the slides. Essentially, we're going to start with our agenda. We're going to be covering what is Wikag 2.0, what is Wikag 2.1, and what is Wikag 2.2. So there's a bit of a theme going on there. We're then going to be covering the 9 new Wikag 2.2 test criteria, which have currently existing. And then we're going to go into conclusion and questions. So just quickly about Vision Australia, if you don't know who we are the leading provider of blindness and low vision services in Australia, enabling tens of thousands of children and adults to live the lives they choose. So we provide a lot of services and support for people who are blind or have low vision. Our team, though, the team that is running this webinar is the Digital Access team. We are pan disability, which effectively means that we don't just focus on blindness and low vision. We cover the full spectrum of disabilities that are out there. And also we are a leading accessibility consultancy in Australia and also a member of the W3C or the World Wide Web Consortium. We will talk about them shortly as well. Also, 100% of the profits that we earn in the Digital Access team return directly to Vision Australia, which in turn supports people who are blind or low vision. So what is Wikag 2.0? Wikag is an acronym that stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and 2.0 is the version that is most commonly referred to. It's an internationally recognized benchmark for web content accessibility with the overall goal of making the web more accessible for people with disabilities. It became a recommendation from the W3C in December of 2008. So it's quite old in terms of the web. It came out at a time before smartphones had really taken off. And so there were things to address that later on. The W3C themselves, the World Wide Web Consortium, are an international organization of experts, individuals, and organizations. So we've got some really big organizations in there involved, such as Apple, Microsoft, and Google, and also many other smaller organizations and individuals. In Wikag, there are 3 main conformance levels, and each of these conformance levels has its own set of success criteria. A success criterion is something that you can pass or fail in a website. So if you end up failing a success criterion on your website, then it indicates that there's likely some sort of barrier there for people with disabilities. So the 3 levels are level A, which is considered the absolute critical basics of accessibility on a website. Essentially, if you fail something in level A, then it will mean that people cannot access content without these success criteria being met. You then got level AA, which are considered essential success criteria. And some people may have significant barriers without these success criteria being met. And then you have level AAA, which are considered very useful, potentially essential for some. However, most organizations will only cherry pick from the level AAA success criteria. That's not everything in level AAA will apply to every website that's out there. So you may just pick a few that apply to your website for an extra level of accessibility. All success criteria within a level must pass in order to conform with that level. So if you want to meet Wikag 2.0 level A, then you'll need to pass all success criteria in level A. However, these success criteria also build on top of each other. So if you want to pass Wikag 2.0 level AA, then you also need to pass everything in level A. So they're not separate things. It's not like I can only pass the things in AA to conform with AA. I'll need to pass things also in the lower levels in order to meet conformance. We then got Wikag 2.1. This is an extension of Wikag 2.0, and it was released in June of 2018. It introduced 17 new success criteria dispersed across the 3 conformance levels, A, AA, and AAA. It focused on improving accessibility for mobile, which was sorely lacking in Wikag 2.0, and also made a lot of improvements and changes for people with low vision, and some changes for people with cognitive disabilities as well. None of the original Wikag 2.0 success criteria changed when Wikag 2.1 released. So it's literally a bolt-on addition. It says extra success criteria for you to conform with. Nothing in the original Wikag 2.0 changed when Wikag 2.1 released. We can now talk about how the law is set up in Australia as far as Wikag. Essentially, all government and non-government websites should be conformant with Wikag 2.0 level AA at a minimum. However, many organizations in Australia choose to conform with Wikag 2.1 level AA instead on an internal accessibility policy level. So you may opt to choose and make your organization go the extra mile to go to Wikag 2.1. When Wikag 2.2 is released, it will likely see organizations start to adopt that as well into internal accessibility policies. It will probably be a much longer time before we see Wikag 2.1 or 2.2 go into actual Australian law. However, as a side note, the ASEN 301549 standard, I know it's a very fun number, states that procured web software should be conformant with Wikag 2.1 level AA. So if you're buying something from somewhere else, then you have the expectation that it should be Wikag 2.1 level AA instead of just Wikag 2.0. Moving on, the next slides in the presentation all relate to Wikag 2.2. Now, this is a warning to let you know that Wikag 2.2 is a working draft. So that means everything that I'm about to tell you is subject to change. It is currently being worked on as we speak. There are changes happening all the time with Wikag 2.2. And while it is quite late in the draft, there still could be some pretty significant changes. So what I'm about to tell you may get outdated in the coming weeks or months. So what is Wikag 2.2? Guess what? It's another extension of Wikag 2.0 or 2.1. And it's a working draft, which means it's not done yet. The W3C and the many experts within the W3C are currently working out what should be in Wikag 2.2. It currently introduces 9 new success criteria across the 3 conformance levels. So in comparison to Wikag 2.0 going to 2.1, it's a smaller jump going from 2.1 to 2.2. 2.1 added 17. This one at the moment is only adding 9. So it's a comparatively a much smaller increase in success criteria. It has a focus for people who use mobility aids and people who have cognitive and or intellectual disabilities. These 2 groups really needed more support on the web. So that was a big focus for Wikag 2.2. When is Wikag 2.2 actually going to release or become a candidate recommendation, which essentially means that it's done, but not fully set in stone? We are expecting it by the end of this year, probably by November this year, but who knows, that has a big question mark on it. It could get blown out into next year. That's entirely possible. Wikag 2.2 is actually meant to release back in July, so it's already a few months late, and who knows, it could take even longer. Wikag 2.2 is a bit unique in that it has one small change to the Wikag 2.0 success criteria. The success criterion 247 focus visible is now level A, considered critical, instead of level AA. And that's because we actually have some new rules regarding focus indicators in Wikag 2.2, which meant that the old success criterion had to sort of drop down a level to make room for the new stuff coming in Wikag 2.2. So just like the conformance levels, A, AA, and AAA, Wikag 2.0, 2.1, and 2.2 build on top of each other. So we got Wikag 2.0, and then on top of that, you got Wikag 2.1, and then on top of that, you got Wikag 2.2. And it's still the case that if you want to be, for example, conformant with Wikag 2.1 level AA, then you also need to pass everything in Wikag 2.0 level AA. So they build on top of each other. They are very much think of them like extensions or add-ons to the original Wikag 2.0 guideline. So let's dive into the main part, the new success criteria. What's coming in Wikag 2.2, at least at the moment? So the first major change is 2411 focus appearance minimum, which is a level AA success criteria. Basically, what this is saying is that focus indicators need to always be easy to visually see on the screen. This will greatly assist people who use mobility aids, such as keyboards and switch controls, or other mobility aids that sort of work through a keyboard interface. So I'll explain what a focus indicator is. So essentially, focus indicators are the main ways that keyboard navigators know where they are on a page. If you use a mouse to navigate through a website, you will of course see a little mouse cursor moving around, and you'll be able to click on things based on where the mouse cursor is. Well, a focus indicator allows someone who's using an alternative way to input or navigate through a computer to actually know where they are on the page before they press the enter key to activate a button or a link, for example. Usually, focus indicators only appear on interactive objects, usually. But I got 3 examples here. I got a button, a link, and a search form field. And as I press the tab key, you will see a little black outline appear around each of these controls. And what that black outline that you see there, that is the focus indicator. That's letting me know where I am on the page. So this is something that you can try yourselves on your own website. You can just load it up in a browser and just start pressing the tab key. And you should be able to see a little focus indicator moving around the screen. If you don't, then it may indicate that you actually have a Wikag failure. You can also go Shift Tab to go backwards as well. So you can go Tab to go forwards and Shift Tab to go backwards through the page. However, focus indicators can sometimes be hard to see. So Wikag 2.0 in 247 Focus Visible had the rule that focus indicators must be visible. And how it defined visible was that it can be seen. So that left it up pretty wide and open on what is considered can be seen. But how it was generally interpreted is that if you can see it, then it's technically, you can see a focus indicator, so it passes. That does mean a single pixel dot could be enough to have an accessible focus indicator. So I'm actually tabbing through the button and the link here, and you might be able to see a little tiny dot sort of above the button and the link. And you might be able to see it on this slide, but if you're going through a website, it can be pretty hard to actually spot that little pixel dot on the focus indicator. So let's go into Wikag 2.2 and how it tried to address this problem. The first requirement with focus indicators in Wikag 2.2 is that they need to contrast well, meaning that the focus indicator itself should stand out from its background. And also the difference between the focused and the unfocused state should be clear enough. There should be enough contrast between them. Example could be having a black button and it changes to a very, very light gray when you focus on it. Or sorry, a very, very dark gray when you focus on it, which comparing black to dark gray, there isn't much difference there. So it's going to be hard to see. I have an example here on the slide of 3 buttons, and the middle button is currently focused at the moment. And there is a very light gray border around that button to indicate that it's focused. And the border color is, if you actually assess it and see what color it is, the hex code of it is #CCC, which if you compare that color to a white background, does not meet the contrast requirement. So we need at least a 3:1 contrast when comparing these colors. So one tool that you can use to measure color contrast is the color contrast analyzer, available on the Vision Australia website and also the TPGI website. So I'm sure my colleagues can link that tool in the chat. Here is an example of a passing color contrast. So we have a border color there of 949494 as its hex code. And this is the absolute borderline. This is the darkest gray that you can get to and have it still pass Wikag 2.2. So ideally you want to go darker than this, but this is sort of showing where the line is. That's the lightest gray you can have before it actually starts failing. The next thing is to have a defined minimum size for your focus indicator. So this will stop the problem of having a very tiny dot for your focus indicator. And there's 2 different ways that Wikag 2.2 allows you to do it. There's the outline method and there's also the shape method, which I'll show you later. But we'll start with the outline method. So this is saying that the total size of a focus indicator now needs to be at least the area of the perimeter of a control. And that's a bit of a mouthful there. So I've got an example here of a home button, and there's a pretty clear border around it. And what we want is to make sure that, there's a loud engine outside, it's going to make sure that there is a big enough focus indicator for this control, so we don't have to have a little hard to see dot. So what we do is that we count up how many pixels the perimeter of this button has. So we got 100 pixels plus 100 pixels plus 100 pixels plus 100 pixels. And that equals 400 pixels. However, when we are counting up these borders, we are also counting the corners of the box twice. So we want to account for that and actually take away 4 pixels on the corners, which in total, the total perimeter of this button is 396 pixels. Therefore, the total size of our focus indicator must be at least 396 pixels. So our focus indicator, our outline, if you count up every pixel in that focus indicator, there should be at least 396 for that particular button. Here I've got some examples on how this actually gets applied. So the first column is showing our home button when it's in its not focused state. Our second column here is showing different examples of failing focus indicators. So the first one there is that we have a dotted border around the focus indicator, and that's a fairly classic focus indicator that you see on many websites. Unfortunately, this is going to fail in Wikag 2.2 because there isn't enough dots or pixels within that focus indicator to actually be more than the perimeter of the button, and therefore it's going to be hard to see. The second failing example is I've got a focus indicator, but it's inside sort of the outside perimeter of the focus indicator. And so that means that if you counted it all up, you're actually going to have less pixels there than the outside area, outside perimeter of the button. And the third example there, I have just a little underline under the little home icon, and that definitely does not have enough pixels either. On the third column, I have some examples of passing focus indicators. So focus indicators that are considered large enough to be able to clearly see. We have an example there of an outside border around it. And if it's just a 1 pixel border around the outside of the button, then that's enough to pass Wikag 2.2. So a 1 pixel solid border around the whole thing, that will pass level AA in Wikag 2.2. The second example there, I've got the focus indicator inside the outside perimeter of the button, but I've actually made it thicker so that there is actually enough pixels in that focus indicator to add up to be more than 396. And the bottom example there, I have a little underline under the home icon, but I've made it much thicker so that if we counted up all the pixels in there, there will be more than 396. So the reason why there's this somewhat complicated equation to sort of work out is to allow for different sizes of buttons. Obviously, you've got very big buttons on websites, you've got very small buttons, and it's unreasonable to expect a very big focus indicator for something that is quite small. So it's relative to size. If you've got a smaller button, you can have a smaller focus indicator. If you've got a bigger button, then you'll need a bigger focus indicator. There's also the shape method for calculating or providing a clearly visible focus indicator. So instead of counting up, the outline of a button and sort of making a focus indicator based on that, you could quite simply add a shape to your focus indicator. And this may be more applicable in some cases where maybe you've got a very wide button or a very wide link, and it's going to be quite distracting to have a very, very big focus indicator. You could just opt for a shape instead. So I've got an example here of 2 example buttons, and the first example button has a very thick and clear shape on the left-hand side to indicate that it's focused, and it looks visually quite nice. So what W3C are trying to do here is to allow for different designs on a website. However, there are some rules in regards to the shape. It should be at least 4 pixels thick at its maximum, and at no part of the shape should be less than 2 pixels thick. So it allows for different kinds of shapes. It doesn't have to be a rectangle. It could be something else, but ideally, you shouldn't get too skinny at any point in the shape, and ideally, it should be at least 4 pixels thick. That's sort of how it works. It's considered that this shape, this rectangle, is visible enough. So yeah, that's essentially how that one works. The next requirement for focus indicators is that it should contrast well with what's adjacent to it. So a very common problem with focus indicators that we see on websites is we'll be tabbing along and there's a blue focus indicator, and you can see it quite clearly on most buttons, but then you get the blue focus indicator on a blue button, and suddenly the focus indicator doesn't stand out particularly well. It sort of blends in with the blue button. So I have an example here of, again, our home button, and we have a blue border around or blue focus indicator around our black border. And when you compare the black to the blue, it does not contrast particularly well. There's a less than 3:1 contrast when you compare them. So it's actually going to be hard to notice that focus indicator. Whereas on the right, I've actually put a little gap between our button and the focus indicator so that the blue is comparing to the white instead of the black, in which case it's going to pass. It will be a more than 3:1 contrast ratio. So that's essentially something to be aware of. If you use a certain color in your websites, if you have a blue sort of branding and you use a blue focus indicator, just watch out for this one, because you may end up failing with WCAG 2.2. And the last one is that the focus indicator shouldn't be fully obscured by something else. So I'm sure everyone has seen, if you go to a website nowadays, you often get a little pop-up at the little bottom of the screen saying, do you want to accept our cookies? And it will say yes or no. Quite commonly how these are implemented is that they're implemented as static on the screen. So if you scroll up or down through the web page, you will always see that little "do you accept our cookies" message at the bottom. Now, the problem that this could have is if you're navigating with the keyboard, you can actually end up focusing on something behind that banner, and therefore you lose track of where your focus indicator is. So I've got an example here of some links. So I'm just going to tab through them. So we got link 1, link 2, and I tabbed and the focus indicator is gone. It actually got obscured behind that static banner. So that will end up causing a failure of WCAG 2.2. On the right, I have some more links. So I'm going to tab through them as well. Link 1, link 2, and we got link 3 there. And link 3 in this case, I can still partially see the focus indicator. So according to WCAG 2.2 level AA, this will be enough to pass. So that basically goes through the 4 main requirements of focus indicators in WCAG 2.2. Now, what does this mean? It does mean some quite big things. So having just a blinking text cursor for text fields, having that only will fail. So that never used to fail if you're just tabbing through a form and all you get is a little blinking cursor to let you know where you are. That's not going to be enough now in WCAG 2.2. So you want to add a border around whatever form field has focus. Also, a change in background color can definitely work. So if you've got a submit button here, and when it's not focused, it's black, but when we focus on it, it changes to yellow. As long as the difference in color is different enough so that it's a very clear difference, at least a 3:1 contrast and difference, then it's going to pass. And also something to note is that default browser focus indicators will fail if they do not meet the requirements of 2.4.11. Now, this is quite prominent in the Firefox browser. Firefox does not have a very good focus indicator. It actually has one that is light gray and dotted. So it is going to mean that until Firefox updates their default focus indicator, there is going to be a lot of failures in WCAG 2.2 because Firefox has such a bad focus indicator, unfortunately. Moving on to the next success criterion, focus appearance enhanced, level AAA. This is the only level AAA success criterion introduced in WCAG 2.2. Basically, it's just a stricter version of the AA variant that I just went through. The only real differences here is that the contrast must be at least 4.5:1 instead of 3:1. So your borders have to be a little bit darker. The minimum size of your focus indicator has to be double the perimeter of the button. So that example we had before, where we counted up 396 pixels, we'll actually need to times that by 2 to actually get the minimum requirement size for that focus indicator. And also the focus indicator must not be obscured at all. So even if it's slightly obscured, if you can just see it poking out, that's not going to be enough to pass the AAA variant. So it's just a bit more strict in the level AAA version. Moving on to page break navigation, level A, this is something completely different. Basically what this one is saying is for content separated by page numbers, there should be a mechanism to skip to a certain page number. So this actually is quite a unique success criterion, is that it mostly applies to document-based content on the web. This will assist people who customize the appearance of text. So that could be people with low vision or people with cognitive disabilities as well. So where this comes into play is, you remember back in school when your teacher would tell you, okay, kids, turn to page 394. So for kids who just had, a paper version of their booklet, they could just turn their page over to 394. They can see the page number at the bottom and, they're away. But nowadays in 2021, you're going to be much more likely to have digital versions of those books. So you might have it, in a PDF, for example. So here I have an example of Chrome's inbuilt PDF reader. And what you can see at the top there is a little mechanism that allows you to skip to a certain page number. So you can type in whatever page number you want, and it will skip down to that page number. So having a feature like that is now a requirement in Wikag 2.2. So if you're uploading your own documents to your website, and if you're using a certain tool to show those documents, then there needs to be a mechanism in place to skip to a specific page number. Now, how does this benefit people with low vision and people with cognitive disabilities? Well, if you increase the text size in a document, then often it means that there's going to be more pages in your document compared to the default text size. So I've got an example here of a document about rhinos, and you can read everything in the document at 100% zoom on a single page. But when you go to 300% zoom, suddenly not all the text can fit on the same page. So that means someone with low vision has a different amount of pages to the person next to them who is at the default level of zoom. And that's going to be a real problem in a classroom setting. When your teacher tells you to go to page 394, your page 394 is different to the person next to you. So by having a mechanism to actually skip to the real page 394, you're making it easier for those people. This also benefits people who change the appearance of font as well. They may have a font that increases the text size slightly, or they may have a font that has more line spacing between lines, and that can also result in more pages being in their document. So this is going to be really helpful success criterion in the classroom or at university to make sure that people who have alternate ways of viewing the document aren't left behind when the teacher gives them instructions. The next success criterion is 257 dragging movements. It's a level AA success criteria. Basically, what this one is saying is ensure that drag and drop functionality, where you sort of tap on the screen and move, or with your mouse, sort of hold down left click and move, that sort of functionality can actually be performed with a single tap or click. So this is going to assist people who use mobility aids or people without fine motor control. So people with Parkinson's disease or people with arthritis as an example. So we've got an example here of some things that you can drag around. We've got apple, cabbage, and pumpkin here. And for someone who uses something like a mouse stick, they may be paralyzed from the neck down, and they may have their device mounted on their wheelchair. They may literally use a stick in their mouth to tap on things on their device. And you can imagine that performing a dragging movement with something like a mouse stick is very, very hard to do. With a mouse, it's fairly easy. You can just go over to what you want to drag, just hold down left click and move it down. That's not too bad. But if you have Parkinson's disease or if you have arthritis, actually performing that action of a drag movement can be quite difficult. So Wikag 2.2 came along and said, okay, there needs to be another way to do this. So one thing we could add here is an edit order button. And when we tap on that, we will then be able to actually just tap on what we want to move and then tap where we want it to drop. So that is just a single tap, just tap what we want and tap where we want to go. And then we can reorder it in that way. We could also have something like a drop down next to each of the options here. So we could have a order drop down next to Apple. And if we wanted Apple to be the third in the order, then we could just set that option to be free, and then Apple will move down to the third level. So that's essentially another way of doing it. Now, something to be aware of is that you might, if you're familiar with Wikag, you might be thinking, doesn't this already exist in Wikag 2.0 under keyboard accessibility? And yes, there is. If you go look at Wikag 2.0 and you look up keyboard, you will find that there is a mention of drag and drop functionality there, but that is only covering the side of it of making sure that it's keyboard accessible, that you can do drag and drop movements with the keyboard. This one is mostly focusing on people with other kinds of, who need other kinds of mobility aids, or people who cannot perform drag and drop actions, but they may not necessarily use a keyboard to navigate. So it's just covering all bases for people who use different kinds of mobility aids. The next really big success criterion is 258 target size minimum. It's level AA. Basically, what this one is saying is that you can have small buttons on your website or app, that's fine, but there shouldn't be a bunch of small buttons all very close together, because it's going to be hard for people who use mobility aids to actually tap on the right button if everything's all close together, tightly packed. So to be clear, this is not saying that buttons and controls need to be at least 24 pixels by 24 pixels in size. So you can have buttons that are smaller than that. But what it is saying is that you should allow 24 by 24 pixels of a button's personal space without another button or control entering that personal space. So you shouldn't have buttons so close together that they end up being hard to tap on. You end up accidentally tapping the button next to it, for example. So we got some examples from the W3C here on how this actually works. So the first example here is that we've got a bunch of buttons all right next to each other, but the size of the buttons are 44 pixels by 44 pixels. So that is larger than 24 pixels by 24 pixels. So you don't need any room or gaps between any of those buttons. Each of those buttons should be easily pressable by the majority of people who use a mobility aid. Also, second example here, we've got 24 pixels by 24 pixels for our buttons, and all the buttons are very closely packed next to each other. This will also pass as well. This is sort of the borderline on where it's going to pass. The third example, the buttons are actually less than 24 pixels by 24 pixels in size. They are 20 pixels by 20 pixels in size. So that means that these buttons are quite small. And so we're going to need to have a little bit of gaps between each of the buttons to make sure that there is enough clearance between the buttons so that people don't accidentally hit the phone button when they were meant to hit the home button. So we've added 4 pixels of gaps in between each of those buttons in that example there, which totals 24 pixels. And the last example there, we have 20 pixels by 20 pixel buttons, and they're all tightly next to each other with no gaps. That is going to fail. So where we got to look out for this one on your website is when you have situations like this, when you've got a bunch of buttons right next to each other. We need to make sure that there is enough clearance, enough personal space for each button so that people don't accidentally or struggle to actually tap the correct option from the buttons. Here I have another example from W3C. This time we have a bunch of buttons all next to each other, and they're actually not icons this time. This time they are words. We've got close, save, cancel, export, and push. And so the width of the buttons are actually quite wide. So there is no concern really on making sure there's a gap, between these buttons because they've got enough width between them. And they're only 20 pixels tall though, but that's okay because there's nothing above or below it that you could accidentally tap on. So it's okay in this case. There doesn't need to be any gaps between them. So even though it's more of a wider button than tall, it actually works fine in this case. It should be fairly easy for people to tap on. Exceptions to the rule, there's already enough spacing of other controls. So if you've just got a button out on its own, then it's fine. It's you don't really need any text target size requirement for that. It's only when you've got a bunch of stuff right next to each other, it's when you've got to start worrying about it. Another exception is it's within a sentence or block of text. So if you've got a bunch of links in a paragraph next to each other, then that is exempt from the rule. However, list of links are still included. So you've got a list of documents to download, for example, on your website. You want to make sure that there is enough space between each of those little download links so that it's fairly easy to click on the right one. Also, if it's essential to design, then it's exempt as well. So that could be if you're trying to emulate like a legal document and it has to look exactly the same, there's nothing you can do about it, then it's considered essential. So that's exempt as well. The next success criterion is 326 consistent help. It's a level A success criterion. Basically, if you have a help mechanism on your website, it should generally be in the same location on each web page. So this will mainly assist people with cognitive and/or intellectual disabilities this time. So a help mechanism could be any of the following. It could be like a human contact details, like a phone number. It could be a human contact mechanism, like a chat to speak to someone. It could be a self-help option, like a wiki or an FAQ, or it could be a fully automated contact mechanism, like a chatbot. So I have an example here of the City of Vincent website, and on their website, they have a little contact link at the very top of their page. And they've also got a direct human contact sort of button at the bottom right where you can speak to someone at the City of Vincent to ask questions. And as you navigate around the website, you will find that these controls are always in the same spot. So that's excellent. That means if someone needs help at any particular time, if someone gets stuck in a particular process, they will know where to look to find help and actually get support for their particular issue. To be clear, what this success criterion is not saying is that you need a help feature. It's not saying that websites require a help feature on the website. That's actually already covered in Wikag 2.0 in a level AAA success criterion. What this one is saying is that if you do have a help feature, then it just should be in the same location or a very similar location on every page. Now, when you read the actual success criterion for this one, it's actually careful not to use the word location because location is quite exact. It could mean that, the help feature must be in the exact same spot on every page to an absolute pixel level. And that's not the case. That's not what we want from the guideline. So what it instead says is that your help features should be in the same relative order on each page. And that's to say that if you have your help feature above the navigation on your website, then it should be above the navigation on every other web page in your website. So it shouldn't move to somewhere else, but it should be generally in the same spot. Same thing if you got like a help feature in the footer, then you should expect to find the help feature in the footer in your website as well. This also, definitely comes into play with mobile responsive views. When you view your website on a mobile phone, the layout of the page tends to change quite a bit. So there had to be some flexibility in there so that you can have generally the help in the same sort of area, but it doesn't need to be pixel perfect on every page. There's also the next success criterion is 327 visible controls. It's a level AA success criteria. Basically, don't make functionality invisible and only appears on mouse or keyboard focus. This actually assists quite a few different types of disabilities. It assists people with cognitive and or intellectual disabilities. It assists people who use mobility aids, and it also will assist people with low vision. So how this works is that I've got an example here of some text, and it's, it just looks like ordinary text before you hover your mouse over it. It's just nothing really special about it. But when I do hover my mouse over it, you will see that a little box appears around it and a little pencil icon appears, sort of indicating to you that you can edit this text. This sort of situation is going to fail in Wikag 2.2 under visible controls. I've got another example here from Squarespace. And what you'll see here is that when I hover my mouse over the header section, a secret hidden button appears, Edit Site Header, and it only appears when I hover my mouse over it. So how does this help people with disabilities by making sure that we don't have invisible controls like this? Well, people with cognitive disabilities may become stuck in a process or not remember how they performed a specific action they did on a previous visit if controls are hidden. They may, be able to do something one time because they were able to find that hidden control, but when they go back to that website, they may get stuck and they go, what did I do last time? How did I do that thing that I did before? People with low vision often miss detail or have a limited screen view. So hidden controls make finding content even harder than it already is. People who use alternative input methods may struggle as well. Some people will use voice input to navigate through a website, but if they can't see the control, then they may not know it exists, or they may not know what to say to activate it, because it requires a mouse or keyboard to actually reveal that hidden control. And if you just navigate with voice, then you may never know it exists. So, of course, as per usual, there are some exceptions to the rule. If there's already an always visible button that does the same thing, so if there was a edit site or edit header button that was always visible on that Squarespace example, then the hidden button is exempt from the rule because there's always a visible button there available. The button is used to enhance keyboard navigation. So if for some reason, a lot of websites have a skip to content link nowadays. So if you're navigating with the keyboard, you'll find a hidden link that will only reveal itself when you're navigating with keyboard. So if the purpose of the button is to make it easier for keyboard navigators to get around, then those are exempt. Also, no exemption, there's a way to make the control visible all the time. So there could be a setting that you could toggle to actually make that hidden control always visible. If you can do that, then you pass. Or it's essential for whatever reason. There's a particular purpose on why that control has to be hidden. Otherwise, if it wasn't hidden, then it wouldn't make any sense. So there could be some edge cases there. 337 accessible authentication level A. This is a one that I think would be quite welcomed. Basically, this one is saying don't force a user to recall their username or password when logging in to a website. Support different methods for users to enter information. So this will assist people with cognitive and or intellectual disabilities to remember their username or password, and also assist people who use mobility aids because there's less effort needed to actually input their username and password by typing it in. So what this one is saying at the moment is at least one of the following must be supported in your login screen. So you need to support at least one of these. So you could have a password manager. You could allow users to copy and paste a username and password into the form fields. allow users to log in via the device via something called WebAuthn. We will get to what that is in a minute. Allow users to log in via a third party, which is known as OAuth, or some other method that doesn't require a cognitive test or recall. So I've got an example here of Netflix, and Netflix supports my password manager LastPass, so it actually suggests my login details for that, which is fantastic. I don't need to remember what it is and type it in. I can just click on Netflix in the LastPass widget, and it will just automatically put in my username and password based on what I've entered before. That's really good. You can see at the bottom of the screenshot here, there's also an option to log in with Facebook. So I can do that as well. And either of those methods, if Netflix provide just one, will be enough to pass accessible authentication in WCAG 2.2. This is WebAuthn. This example here, what this is showing is a Windows security pop-up, and it's actually asking the user to enter the PIN that they use to unlock their device. So this more so commonly happens on phones, where your phone will ask you to enter your PIN number that you use to unlock your phone for a security reason. So some websites are starting to use this as well to actually authenticate users. So that is one way that you could make your logins more accessible. One thing that is not going to be allowed is captchas. So having a captcha on your login, because that often requires a cognitive test to actually complete, where it might pop up and say, click all the squares that have a car in it, or an example like that. That is not going to be allowed for an accessible authentication. And the last success criteria I'm talking about today is 338 redundant entry, level A. This one is a really simple one. Basically, in multi-step forms, don't make a user remember and enter the same information twice. So this will assist people with cognitive and or intellectual disabilities to remember what they inputted before, and also people who use mobility aids, because there's less text entry needed to get through the form. I have an example here of a form with multiple steps, and in step 1, it asks for my ID number. And then later on, in step 4, it asks for my ID number again. This is going to fail redundant entry, or forcing the user to put in the same information twice in the same flow, which is going to be really annoying, or potentially disabling for some people as well. However, with forms, you can have the form fields be pre-populated with what the user entered earlier. So if my ID number field already had my ID number in there, then that's fine. Or you could have the user's input be available to select. So for example, you could have the user enter their address earlier in the form, and then later the form could ask you, did you want your package sent to this address? And it's actually already there, and the user just has to select it. So you're absolutely allowed to do that, but you shouldn't make the user type it in all over again. Some exceptions to the rule: re-entering the information is essential. So there might be some reason to you have to re-enter it. The information is required to ensure the security of the content. So that could often happen with passwords, where the form will say, hey, can you re-enter your password just to make sure it is still you going through the form? So if it's to ensure the security, then it's exempt. Or the previously entered information is no longer valid. Something changed and what you entered before now doesn't apply. So you have to re-enter it. So that essentially is what's coming in WCAG 2.2. To summarize all of that, WCAG 2.2 is mostly going to be beneficial for people who use mobility aids and people with cognitive and or intellectual disabilities, which is really great because WCAG 2.0 and 2.1 had a lot of gaps for those two disability groups. So it's great to see a much more focus in those areas. WCAG 2.2 isn't set in stone yet. It is changing probably literally as we speak. So everything I just told you could change potentially. I expect that there won't be too much differences this late in the draft, but some of the details that I mentioned could definitely change. So be aware of that. And we're expecting it by November, but who knows when it's actually going to be finally done. So organizations should definitely keep WCAG 2.2 in mind for future planning and look at adopting it when it does officially become a recommendation. We also have an article version of this presentation available already. I'm sure one of my colleagues will link it in the chat, but it basically goes through each of everything in an article format with some different examples as well, and also some more detail in some other areas. So please have a look at the article if you want more information. And that is it. We'll go to questions now.
Yes, we've got 4 minutes. So lightning question round for lightning question answers. So let's see how you go with this.
Yep.
There is a few that have come in, so that's really great. Thanks everyone for posting questions. Firstly, Matthew asked, with the new focus indicator requirements, please could you mention how these relate to hover states? And should button hover states, for example, have similar expectations?
As far as what Wikag says, there are no requirements for hover states. So it's only focusing on focus indicators, which is, I think, it's a bit unfortunate because there are definitely some accessibility issues that can affect how visible a focus, a hover state is. The main two problems that you're going to find is buttons or controls or links that aren't clearly buttons, controls, or links. So when you hover over it with your mouse, you can't actually really notice it unless you hover your mouse over it and changes to like a little pointing hand. So that commonly happens when you make like an image a link. People may not realize that there's a link there unless you do something else to make it clear that there is some sort of link there. Maybe when you hover over it, it sort of says link or whatever to let you know that there's something there. The other problem with hover states is sometimes when you hover over something, it ends up failing contrast. So you might have passing color contrast. You can clearly read the text, but when you hover your mouse over it, it ends up becoming really hard to read. So that's a really big problem for that is faced by people with low vision. So be aware of those two. They aren't covered by Wikag, but there are definitely some things you can do to make hover states more accessible.
Awesome. Yu Cheng asked, will the Wikag 3 be ready? And will Wikag 2.2 be applicable as a reference for that?
Yeah, so Wikag 3 is going to be a complete rewrite of Wikag 2.1 to 2.2. It's you will, of course, see a lot of similar themes across them, but it's going to be structured a bit differently. And Wikag 3 is many years away. I'm not really expecting it. There's roadmaps at the moment that say 2023 or 2024. But honestly, I'm expecting it like 2025, maybe even later. But who knows? We'll see how quickly the W3C gets together and actually produces it. There's also very likely going to be a Wikag 2.3 before a Wikag 3 comes out. So, there's still going to be some more stopgaps before we get to the brand new version of the guidelines.
Okay, Denny asked, this question may have been answered already, but rather than using a box outline for the focus states, could you use like a hover state for active components that are more visible?
Yeah, absolutely. You can have a focus state, and you can have the hover state be similar in design to the focus state, if I'm getting your question correctly. It doesn't need to be different or anything like that, but I would try and, when you're designing websites, think about having clear hover states and having clear focus states as well, and how should each look like. You want to try and keep things consistent, I find, with focus indicators. So if you're using a blue border for most things, then generally people are going to be looking for a blue border on the website. So try to keep it consistent when you can. That's sort of my main advice there.
Awesome. So Stephanie says that she's a total Wikag rookie. So apologies if this is a dumb question. There's no dumb questions in web accessibility because there are many questions, so many questions, and so much to know. So thank you for asking the question. And that is that what group of people are supported by the inclusion of focus indicators?
So that would be people who mainly use a keyboard to navigate through the website. So that's going to be people who are paralyzed from the neck down, as an example, and they may use different ways of navigating through a website. So they may use something like a head wand, which is literally a wand that comes out from your head, and you can tap on a special keyboard to navigate with that. a mouse stick, literally a stick in your mouth, and you can tap on a keyboard or on a touch screen using that sort of method. It could also be just people who have pain in their wrist from using a mouse. They may opt to use a keyboard to navigate. It could also be someone who uses switch controls. So they may have a wheelchair and they may have a bunch of controls up near their face where they can navigate forwards and backwards through a website by pressing buttons, by moving their tongue or moving their face around in certain ways to control and navigate through a website in that way. So they need a clearly visible focus indicator so that they know where they are.
Leon asks, or says that I'm assuming the outline and shape methods for focus indicators need to pass the 3:1 contrast ratio.
Yes, so yeah, definitely one of the new requirements is focus indicators need to stand out on the background. So yeah, your borders should stand out well enough. You shouldn't have a light gray, very light gray border on a white background because that's going to be hard visually to see. Yep.
Daniela has asked, how is 3.2.6 that different from consistent navigation in 2.0? And also Shika asked a similar question regarding whether it's similar to 3.2.4 in consistent navigation.
So consistent navigation is more so referring to making sure that menus generally are in the same order on each page of the website. So you shouldn't have, you go to the contact us page on the website and suddenly it moves over to the left-hand side on the contact us page or something like that. It's just, I think the WCAG 2.2 requirement was made because it was quite often for websites to have help on some pages, but suddenly on other pages it's gone. So that is sort of the main requirement. It's making sure that if you do have a help feature that it's always there. It doesn't just disappear on certain pages or on certain page templates. So that is one core difference in that with 3.2.3 consistent navigation, you can have stuff disappear. But with consistent help, you can't have it disappear. I guess that's one of the main differences there.
Yep. Cliff asked if the hover state and the focus state should behave the same way.
They don't necessarily have to. I mean, it can be going through with a mouse, having a really thick border around everything that you hover your mouse over could be really, really distracting. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be the same, but the main concern with hover states is that you don't want to make the thing that you hover over invisible or hard to read for someone with low vision. That's probably one of the biggest concerns. And definitely when you hover over something, you want your mouse cursor to change from a little arrow to a little pointing hand so that it's clear that something's interactive is there.
Okay, Nika has asked, what process do the writers of WCAG 2.2 go through to get the new guidelines approved? And how do they determine what will be changed? I feel like this could be a big answer, but there's probably a short answer to it as well.
Yes, so anyone really can contribute to W3C and the working group. They are accepting responses. So it's something I haven't looked at in a while, to be honest. But you can go onto W3C and you can submit your feedback to them. There's also, I believe, an email where you can just send through email. I believe there's also a GitHub where you can go in there and actually make responses in there. So someone probably can link in the chat to the appropriate links that you can go to.
Yep. Are you allowed to give an option or function for users to hide controls? For example, on a full screen video, I assume controls could never be turned off universally, so they are always available when initiated to prevent confusion.
Yeah, so something like a full screen video is an interesting example. Essentially, one core rule of visible controls is that if there's some sort of indicator of there's something here going on, like let's say there was a pencil here all the time to show that this text is editable, but then you click on the pencil and more controls appear, that's fine because there's sort of a button there to let you know that there's something going on and you can interact with this. So that's a sort of an important point of the rule as well, is that if there's something there to let you know it's interactive and you can do something, then you're going to be passing.
And last question, Denny, thank you. Floating chat controls while meeting consistent placement requirement, does this floating element cause issues for low vision users who use magnification?
Yeah, so
good question.
It's an excellent question. It's something that we've noticed a lot in the websites that we audit. So static stuff that's always there on the page, sort of floating above everything else, they can actually become quite overwhelming when you browser zoom into the page. When you increase the text size using the browser, the static things on the page don't actually get bigger as well, and ends up taking up a huge part of the screen. And so you're trying to read text through this little gap between all the static menus and the static footer. So it's something to keep in mind that particularly if you're on a mobile or a responsive view, you generally don't want things to become static. Even something like a little chat or a little thing floating at the bottom right-hand corner, when you increase the text size, that becomes quite big and can end up obscuring quite a lot of the page. So test it, see how those static chat messages or chat floating functions appear on your mobile phone, and make sure that they aren't obscuring a huge amount of the page.
All right, and that's everything. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you, Deb. And thank all of you for coming to join us today for this presentation. Hope you all enjoyed it and found it really informative and interesting. I love the way Matt breaks down complicated information into simple examples. So I loved it. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so if you're interested in learning more for yourself or your team about digital accessibility, then you can check out our other presentations on our YouTube channel. We'll let you know when this one comes out. Have a look at our training courses that are available. Get in touch with us if you've got any questions about that or anything to do with digital accessibility. We'll send a link out to ask for feedback about this presentation. So please do that and let us know what you thought. Let us know if you've got suggestions for other topics for us to present in future. And thank you again for all coming. I hope you really enjoyed it. And yeah, I hope you have a great day today. And if you're in Victoria, a long weekend as well. So hopefully see you all soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed.